Let's bring in Dr. John Hemmings for more. He is the founding director of the Asia Studies Center at the Henry Jackson Society. Dr. Hemmings, thanks for joining us today. It's been 40 years now since China's reform and opening up, and we've seen China's economy take off the last few decades, but slow dramatically in recent years. Is this a pivotal moment for China?
It absolutely is. There's been a real debate in the country about whether political reform would continue along with economic reform. Now, we've seen the answer to that in 2017 was definitely no, as Xi Jinping kind of held power for life now. The question, of course, has been whether you'd use that power to push through the economic reforms, and where the most people have been looking to see whether he's doing that on the ground is policies on the state-owned enterprises and the state-owned sector. So I think if you look at a lot of his speeches, he tends to equate them as equal, and he continues to say that the state-owned sector must be supported and fully integrated as a part of what he calls, socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the jury is still out on whether he intends to really fully implement a kind of free market style economy. So the jury's out.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of pressure could Xi Jinping be facing at home?
Well, we saw very interestingly a speech by Deng Pufang, who is the son of Deng Xiaoping, of course, China's great leader, the man who pushed China down this great road of economic reform back 40 years ago. So his speech in October was very not mentioned at all in Chinese media, and some observers perceive it to be somewhat critical of Xi, although the speech itself is very kind of praising of Xi. It says that China has to keep a low profile, as his father had said, and it needs to act less assertively on the global stage. And of course, for many countries like India, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, a Chinese assertive policy has been a real factor in their foreign policies over the last 5 or 6 years. So he's facing domestic pushback, but it's only coming out in small little areas. Overall, the trajectory inside China is that this is a man who's taking very deep control of the state.
Right, and the Chinese president has some pretty big goals for the country moving forwards. Of course, we have seen some pretty miraculous things in China in the last few decades. For example, lifting 500 million people out of poverty. What must Xi Jinping do to be successful?
I mean, of course, it's a very Western-centric answer I'd give, but I suppose loosen up the controls on data and media. The Chinese are extremely inventive and intellectually rich culture. I think to some extent he's got a very strict timeline of what he wants China to accomplish politically and on the world stage. Perhaps he needs to get off that timeline and simply react to some of the U.S. pushback. I mean, the U.S. pushback isn't just from Trump, it's from the entire U.S. establishment. So even if the U.S. slips to second place as a global economy, we really don't want to see trade tensions between them. And there's a lot that China could do to reform some of its more egregious practices regarding subsidies and tech transfer.
All right, Dr. John Hemmings, thank you for joining us today.